Okay, here's what we're going to do. We are going to figure out this problem. Y equals -3 sine parentheses 2x minus pi parentheses minus 1.
Sweet. 1 equals quarter of 2x minus pi minus 1.
I'm going to go through my thought process on this. There are other ways to do this, but I want to tell you what I think, and I rarely get them wrong. Like 2003, I think, was the last time. That was math humor. Okay, so far, how many got that right? Yeah. The rest of you need to shape up. All right, first thing I always look for is the midline. Where's my midline? -1. -1.
Oh, I did.
So if you didn't have a -1 midline, you're already wrong. It's kind of hard for you to get that right. On the test that comes up, you are going to write these things on the side. I'm going to ask you, hey, what's the midline? What's the amplitude? What's the phase shift? What's the period? So over here to the side, I know that this is where my midline is. So I'm going to write that down. I'm going to write down that my midline is at -1. It shifted down 1. That helps me to visualize what's going on. What about my amplitude? Okay, it flipped and it's stretch 3. So the amplitude on the test, you're just going to put down as a +3. And I probably would in parentheses write down that it flipped, so that you know it's upside down. How about the period?
It was increased by.
No, what is the period?
Pi.
Pi. Everything happens in pi units. And my phase shift, which means how far did I move over from where I started, is setting the parentheses equal to 0. And the answer is pi over 2. Because 2x minus pi equals 0, when you solve that, meaning set it equal to 0, you move the pi over, you get 2x equals pi, divide both sides by 2, and you get x equals pi over 2. If you can't figure out these 4 things on the test that's coming up, for each graph that you have to graph, you're in deep doo-doo. So I'm telling you right now, this is what's on the test. I do it in stages. Okay, I do it in stages. I do 2 things actually, maybe at once, maybe 3, but I'm going to take it piece by piece, just so you can see the transformation of what happened. Originally, if I were to graph this thing, my normal sine graph would have looked like this. You don't have to draw this, I just want to show you something. So this is what my sine graph looks like. And we've seen this a few times now. So here's the sine graph. That's what it looks like. But in the red, my midline moved it down. So now, in the red, if I move it down, it looks like this. So this is what the midline thing did. It just dropped that graph down. So I do the midline thing first in my head. Afterwards, I go to the amplitude. I know that it's 3 and flipped. What does that mean? Stop whistling. Thank you. From the midline, that means normally I would go up 3, back to the midline, down 3, and back up to the midline. But now because I'm flipped, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down instead of up. So from my midline, I'm going to go down 3. 1, 2, 3. Oh, shoot, I want to do. Sorry. I'm going to go back up to the midline. Then from the midline, I'm going to go up 3. 1, 2, 3. And then I'm going to come back to the midline. So this is what my graph looks like now, including the midline change and the amplitude. 3 units below the midline, 3 units above. Notice how I still have one valley and one mountain. But because of the negative sign, I started with the valley. So as you're considering your new graph, the thing that's really important is you always have to talk about where your new midline is. So here's my new midline, the -1. Everything is based on the midline. Kind of like when we talked about parabolas and stuff, and we said it's always based off the vertex or circles, that kind of thing. This is always based off the midline. And then your amplitude is always based off the midline as well. So this was where my amplitude was coming from. The next thing that I'm going to take care of is the period. So the period has to do with this thing in front of the x. And we said that instead of being 2 pi, and you can see the blue graph stretch out all the way to 2 pi, I'm going to do the same 5 points, but I'm going to be done by the time I get to pi. So the way that that looks now, if I make it happen with the new period, is I start here, but instead of having my first valley be at pi over 2, it's going to be in between pi over 2 and 0, which would be at pi over 4. Then I'm back to the midline at pi over 2. And then I hit my mountain, not at 3 pi over 2, but halfway in between pi over 2 and pi, which is 3 pi over 4. Ooh, that was a bad visual on the last one. And then by pi, I come back down to the midline. So now taking care of my period change, meaning I'm going twice as fast, so it only takes me half as long to occur. I'm now finishing in pi units, not 2 pi. 1 valley, 1 mountain in pi. Is the phase shift. If I do the phase shift, all I do is I look at that orange graph now and move every point exactly pi over 2 to the right. So the point here that was on 0, -1, now goes to pi over 2, -1. The point that was at pi over 4 now goes to 3 pi over 4. And then I come back up to the midline. Into the mountain. And back down to the midline. So it looks like this, shifted pi over 2. My final graph is in purple. Notice that the period is still pi. Pi over 2 to 3 pi over 2. Half to 1.5. That's a 1 unit jump, 1 pi jump. Notice that my amplitude is still 3. 3 units get down to the bottom of the valley from the midline. 3 units get to the top of the mountain from the midline. Notice that it's upside down because of the negative sign. And notice that I've moved pi over 2 units to the right from where I first began. Number 1. Normal amplitude for sine or cosine is 1. Normal period is 2 pi. If you're trying to find the period, that's always equal to 2 pi divided by whatever the b is. So in our last problem, we had 2x. So 2 pi divided by 2 is pi. That's why the period was pi. If you're trying to find the b in an equation, you would take 2 pi and divide by the period if you knew it. And if you know anything about math, these are really the same equations. Just solve for a different variable or thing. And then the last thing, just as a reminder, and we just got done saying it again, the phase shift is when you set the the bx minus c equal to 0 and solve for x. These are the end of the super secret notes.